I've got the great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Dan Graham. Dan Graham's work often focuses on cultural phenomena, incorporates photography, video, performance, glass, and mirror structures. His work has been shown in many exhibitions: Venice Biennale 76, 2003, 2004, 2005, Documenta 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10. Actually, Dan has created his first garden pavilion on the occasion of Documenta 1982. And if today we have a garden marathon, and I mentioned it earlier when we spoke about the exhibition also in Rome, it has all to do with Dan. When for the first time as a student I went to New York in '87, Dan and I had this long discussion, and Dan told me all about gardens, and he became, as he said, very interested in the 18th century allegorical English garden, which also contained allegories of politics. To quote Dan, I wanted a narrative structure to defeat the minimal art object. I also wanted something you could walk through, a narrative structure you could walk through. Dan was then at the very first marathon year in 2006 in conversation with Alain Robbe-Grillet, a very legendary moment. And he's also been telling us a lot about literature and science fiction and gardens. So it was one of the reasons and triggers actually for us to go and see Brian Aldiss. And you will see later the film about the garden of Brian Aldiss. The title of Dan Graham's participation today is Museum as Garden, Garden as Museum. A very warm welcome to Dan Graham.
My introduction to gardens, is this on? Yeah. Was through Rudiger Schuttler. Rudiger introduced me to Rococo Garden. The architect was the architect was a Belgian Wallonian dwarf, Cuvier, and the garden. Is it on? And okay, okay, I think this is better. The garden is the Rococo Pavilion, which is a hall of mirrors, was Amalienberg, and the garden is in Nymphenburg. It was Ludwig I, not Ludwig II. Okay. But I started working with gardens because of the French socialist government in the 1980s. All the museums were shifted to overlay of different gardens with chateaus in regional areas of France. The use of gardens in museums began actually with Documenta, Documenta, and also Munster, because these exhibitions were done actually often in summer as education and entertainment for families with kids, and there were always Baroque chateaus, and I used the garden situation for my work. In relationship, the pavilions were like Amalienberg. They were not follies. They were actually modeled after using two-way mirror glass. Were actually modeled after two things in the city. The center of the city was a two-way mirror glass building. Instead of one-way mirror, I used it as both two-way mirror. People inside can see each other outside, and their gazes and bodies are superimposed on each other. My work became very impressionist because I always used the situation where you could lie down inside and outside. They're very good for picnics, but in France, when I was doing work, often in France, people would come in a car with their families and with their kids. They camp out one day, and the next day they go to see work in gardens. The socialist people under Jacques Lang wanted to regionalize art, get away from Centre Pompidou. Parc La Villette, in its original idea, was an antidote to a Centre Pompidou in the center, and an antidote to Euro Disney. So my work, in some ways, deals with the center of the city, but the edge. My first work, Homes for America, was about suburbia. So in one of I'm going to show two pieces. In one of the pieces, which is a two-way mirror hedge labyrinth. Also, I should say, in all my works in gardens in France, there was always an overlay of different time periods in garden history. Europe is all based on overlays of different periods. My work is about history. It's not about, at one point in the 60s, I wanted my work to be about present time, instantaneous present time, but I got very involved through music. I think Rodney Graham has pointed out my work became about time. So as you walk around the piece, it changes in time. Also, my work became Baroque because people's bodies are reflected, and often in curving situations. And as you walk around, the sky changes, the reflectiveness is against transparency, and the work changes. And as you walk around it, you're activated in time. So we'll put on the first slide. Can somebody do this? Oh, it's up. This was done. There was a park called Clisson in Brittany. Is that actually it was designed by a follower of Poussin, and he got land very cheap after the Revolution. So he designed a kind of theme park. The theme park has all the Greek temples of Poussin's paintings. It's surrounded by water, and actually there's also a chateau. I wanted to do something across the water, but I didn't have. It was a little too expensive, so I made my own little canal. The piece is one side two-way mirror glass, the other side a pergola. You can walk on the water on the grid, and of course you have reflectivity of yourself, water, and also the sky as you move around it. And the difference, what happens actually, is as it becomes dusk, the pergola, which is very much a suburban situation, the pergola, very early 20th century, the pergola has shadows, so it's very romantic. Next slide. This is when I went back there. There was a Polaroid, and I rephotographed the Polaroid. It was used for weddings. So I'm really combining different time periods, and of course the triangle comes from Aldo Rossi. I was very infatuated by Aldo Rossi. In fact, I did a piece that was never realized in the Domaine de Kerguenac, which had a triangular bridge like Aldo Rossi and another triangular pavilion. And there was at the end of the lake. It was on a lake. At the end of the lake, there was a stone sculpture of a medieval building, and it was a triangle. So everything was reflected on the water on top of each other. It was very. I should say, I think the first museums. I wrote an article called "Museums, Gardens, Museum." The first museums were the Renaissance gardens. They were like Disneyland because they had water features. They were allegorical, like Stowe. They involved philosophical and allegorical ideas, and I think every decade museums change. I really disagree with Buren. He has this kind of post-Descartesian idea the museum doesn't change. In the 80s. Almost all museums were in garden situations, overlay of garden situations, always involving parents and children. And of course, there's a mixture of entertainment, like Disney, and education. Certainly, Documenta was about that. In the 80s and 90s, the interest was children, children's education. So I designed, actually I don't have it here, but I designed a children's daycare center, which was actually with cartoons, CD-ROMs, and computer outlets. There was in the lobby, so children could be entertained and educated while parents saw the museum, what was in the museum. The first work was rejected by Caspar Koenig for the Munster Sculpture Show, but later it was done actually here in London by the Camden Art Centre. And that led to the piece I did, the Waterloo Sunset at the Hayward Gallery, which is intact, although it was destroyed partly for a while, but it's been redesigned, which is both for education in cartoons, and of course in that piece the great thing is you see cartoons that are both classic, like Mickey Mouse, That's for older people and up to date, like Powerpuff Girls. And you can press the screen, and you can get, Rodney Graham did this, you press the touch screen and you can get Tracy Eamon's Why Didn't Become a Dancer video. A friend of mine from Japan, it's used for education purposes. A friend of mine from Japan, they had a Liechtenstein show, and he was making with the kids Liechtenstein paintings. I use for the material, like in my Dia piece, rubber material that's used near slides in playgrounds, because kids can lie down, fall down, and not get hurt. So playgrounds are very important. And talking of playgrounds, the great work of Aldo van Eyck, the great Dutch architect, he did playgrounds at the end of his life. I think playgrounds are very important. So next we'll have the next slide. This is a piece I designed originally for International Garden Year in Stuttgart in '89. In Germany, every 3 years, a city, sometimes a city with problems like Rostock, sometimes a city that's doing very well like Stuttgart, has a garden show in summer. Young landscape architects redesign the city parks, and they do a show about gardening for suburban people. They sell seeds, lawnmowers, and different kinds of plants. And for this show in Stuttgart, they wanted artists to do meeting places. So I designed 2 pieces that were not done: the Skateboard Pavilion, which may be done in Guadalajara eventually, because I thought it's a skateboard pavilion where you can use graffiti. This is because teenagers were not looked after in parks. There's benches for old people, for young people to lie down, but teenagers are considered a menace with graffiti. The other piece I designed was this two-way mirror hedge labyrinth. It has two-way mirror, normal glass, and a hedge. The interesting thing about two-way mirror glass is the hedge actually, from far away, is opaque, but when you get close, it's transparent. And two-way mirror glass is both transparent and reflective. Of course, the hedge comes back to the Baroque garden, also to a certain extent the English garden, but this is a very suburban situation. The hedge defines the edge suburban property, and also the two-way mirror defines the center of the city. So we have a short video, which we'll put on. The piece was finally sold to a collector in La Jolla. It was never realized in Stuttgart. Most of my pavilions take about 20 or 30 years to be realized because the concept was there, but the people weren't willing. So let's put on the video.
The work is from 1989. It was part of an exhibition called International Garden Year. Every 3 years in Germany, a different park is designated International Garden Year. It means renovating and newly designing all the parks of a city and inside the parks. So it's about landscape architecture, redefining the city, and inside this redefined park area are garden shows. So people who are suburban garden lovers can come and shop for flowers, seeds, and other garden things. The idea of International Garden Year was to have meeting points which would have artworks. So I designed two-way mirror labyrinth near a bridge as a kind of meeting point. Hedges are very important to me. They relate to modern suburban settings where the hedges define property lines, public and private, boundary lines with Baroque labyrinth gardens and English garden Baroque gardens. I find the labyrinth is very important not only for hedges, but it defines the idea of the city, because the city is like a labyrinth, right-angle labyrinth. And using two-way mirror with the hedges produces a kind of virtual space. The hedges should be semi-opaque, so from a distance you can't see through them, but they're transparent when you get closer. Just the opposite of two-way mirror, which is both transparent and reflective and shifting at every moment. The two-way mirror reflects people on either side, lost in a labyrinth. So you become lost in a labyrinth of virtual reality. The two-way mirror also is emblematic at the center of the city, which seems to always have an office building which is two-way mirror. So it's in the project for La Jolla, for Bob Orton. I wanted to keep the tree in the center because I think that was the center part of the area. The swing was for a small child, so I saw it from the child's point of view, and Bob Orton seeing everything through a small child. And I wanted to continue the hedges that define that area. So it's a continuation of the hedges, which should be the boundary area and the entrance. I think it's a great piece.
So I did it actually for the Walker Arts Center, the best museum in America, in Minneapolis, using perforated metal along with 2A mirror glass. I also should say about the Robbe-Grillet session. I mentioned to Robbe-Grillet that my favorite that Saul LeWitt and I love Michel Butor, and Michel Butor, the writer, wrote a great novel called Passing Time, about being lost in a Manchester city like Manchester, and the city was like a labyrinth. Saul and I love Michel Butor. Saul said Robbe-Grillet was goddamn romantic because Judd liked him, and in fact, at first I liked Robbe-Grillet. I found out that he takes a lot from Raymond Roussel. It's all wordplay, but since I didn't read French, I didn't really understand it that well. But Michel Butor is very close to Boulez. His work was about seriality. I introduced Saul LeWitt and later Mel Bachner into serial music. And I think, in a way, there's a play with seriality. I have to say, I think the piece here was very successful when it was up. I don't know if we have questions or not. We're running a little bit late, aren't we?
Are there questions for Dan? There's an urgent question. We can take questions for Dan Graham.
I did go to Stowe, though, once when I was here. I really researched gardens. I've written extensively. Also, another article was called about corporate Arcadias, which is about the corporate atrium in the 80s in New York, which were all they were all based on making. You see, originally in the 80s, New York City and London were very dangerous. So you had kind of medieval castle keeps like Barbican, but then they built in the corporate lobbies things that were landscaped like suburbia, with shopping centers and security cameras. I did a lot of work around that period, and my the video catalog I did for the Dia Foundation deals with New York City in the 70s and 80s, and goes back to the botanical gardens of Paxton in England. And I think the greatest work of architecture by Frank Lloyd Wright is this S.C. Johnson building in Racine, and actually the columns look like upside down lily ponds and mushrooms, very much based on botanical gardens. So I relate back to the tradition, the English tradition of Paxton, in some of my work. Okay, I guess we're finished for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much.